It was my last day of high school. The air buzzed with a strange mix of relief and nostalgia as students milled about, signing yearbooks and taking selfies in the hallways that had been our world for the past 4 years. My plan was to linger after the final bell, soak in the empty halls one last time. I'd spent so much of my life in this building, it felt surreal to say goodbye. Most people left quickly, eager to start their summer. By 3:30 p.m., the school was nearly deserted. I wandered through the halls, listening to the sound of my footsteps echo against the lockers. It felt eerie without the usual cacophony of voices. My best friend Claire had texted to say she'd wait in the parking lot, but I wanted a few minutes alone. The light in the science wing flickered, catching my attention. That hallway was always the creepiest. No matter how many times the maintenance team claimed they'd fixed it, the lights always hummed and flickered like something out of a horror movie. I walked down the corridor, my fingers brushing the cool, worn metal of the lockers. As I passed Mr. Graham's chemistry lab, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar. That wasn't unusual during the day, but everyone was supposed to be gone. Peeking inside, I saw the room bathed in dim light, desks neatly arranged, as though class was about to start. The air smelled faintly of chemicals, and a half-erased formula was scrawled on the chalkboard. I was about to leave when I heard a faint noise, something like a whisper. My stomach tightened. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound casual. Silence. Then, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor came from the back of the room. My breath caught. I stepped inside, my sneakers squeaking against the tiles. "Mr. Graham?" I asked. No answer. My eyes scanned the room, and then I saw it, a shadow, moving across the far wall. It wasn't mine, and there was no one else visible in the room. I froze. My rational mind told me it was just a trick of the light. Maybe someone outside the window had walked past. But the windows faced the back lot, and no one was out there. The shadow flickered again, this time crossing the room toward the supply closet. I took a step back, my heart pounding. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. It was Claire. "Where are you? This lot is creepy as hell." Her text didn't help my nerves. I decided to get out of there. As I turned, the door to the supply closet creaked open behind me. I didn't dare look back. My feet moved on autopilot, carrying me out of the room and into the hall. The flickering lights seemed worse now, like they were reacting to my fear. As I passed the library, I noticed something else odd. The lights were on inside. That was strange because Mrs. Turner, the librarian, was always the first to leave. My curiosity got the better of me. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open. Inside, the library felt colder than usual. The rows of books loomed in the dim light, and the fluorescent bulbs buzzed softly. I walked past the checkout desk, heading toward the back where the older books were stored. The whispers began again, faint but persistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I reached the back wall, where a large mirror hung as part of a long-forgotten decoration. My reflection looked back at me, pale and wide-eyed. Then something shifted. My reflection didn't move when I did. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My reflection stood there, watching me. Its mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. My phone buzzed again. "Hurry up, seriously." I didn't need more convincing. Whatever was going on, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I bolted out of the library, my footsteps echoing louder than ever in the empty halls. The main doors were in sight. I was almost there when I heard it, a deep, guttural laugh that stopped me in my tracks. It echoed from behind me, reverberating down the corridor. I turned, but the hallway was empty. The laughter grew louder, as though it were right in my ear. I ran. I burst through the main doors, the sudden brightness of the parking lot almost blinding. Claire was sitting on the hood of her car, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, annoyed. "Finally, what were you doing in there?" "Nothing," I panted, trying to catch my breath. I glanced back at the school, half expecting to see something, or someone, watching me from the doors. But they were closed. and the building stood silent and unyielding in the late afternoon sun. Claire noticed my expression and frowned. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," I lied. "I didn't want to sound crazy." "Let's go." She shrugged and slid off the hood, tossing her phone into the car. I climbed into the passenger seat, my legs trembling. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The drive to Claire's house was uneventful, but I couldn't relax. Every shadow we passed on the road felt like it was reaching for us. By the time we arrived, it was already dusk. Claire's house was a welcome sight. Warm lights spilling from the windows, her mom's car in the driveway. For the first time all afternoon, I felt a bit safer. "Want to stay for dinner?" she asked as we got out of the car. "Sure," I said. I wasn't ready to be alone. Inside, her mom greeted us with a smile, oblivious to the strange tension hanging over me. Claire disappeared upstairs to change, leaving me alone in the living room. I sank into the couch, trying to shake the unease that had followed me. As I stared at the TV, my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, expecting another text from Claire. Instead, the screen showed an unknown number. The message read, "Did you see it?" My blood ran cold. I deleted the message and turned my phone off, telling myself it was probably a prank. But deep down, I knew better. That night, I stayed over at Claire's. We watched a movie, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the house made me jump. Claire teased me, calling me paranoid, but she didn't push when she saw how serious I was. When I finally went to bed in her guest room, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, the faint whispering. It was so soft I thought I might be imagining it. But then the floorboards outside the door creaked. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I reached for my phone, but it was still off. I wasn't sure if I should turn it on, if I wanted to see another message. The doorknob rattled. I shot up, my heart hammering in my chest. "Claire?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving a heavy silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. There was nothing there, just the dark hallway, stretching out like a void. But I felt it. Something was watching me. My eyes darted to the shadows, searching for movement. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the end of the hall, shrouded in darkness. It didn't move. Neither did I. I wanted to scream, to wake Claire and her family, but the sound caught in my throat. The figure tilted its head, almost curiously. Then, in a voice barely louder than the whispers, it said, "You shouldn't have stayed." The next thing I knew, I was running. I bolted down the hall, past the figure, not daring to look back. I pounded on Claire's door until she opened it, her sleepy face quickly turning to concern. "What the hell is wrong?" "Someone's here," I choked out. "In the house." Her mom appeared behind her, holding a phone. "I'm calling the police," she said. We waited in the living room, the lights on in every corner of the house. I didn't tell them about the figure. I couldn't bring myself to. When the police arrived, they searched the house and found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been there. I went home the next day, shaken and exhausted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, even in broad daylight. That night, I dreamed of the figure standing at the end of my bed, whispering words I couldn't understand. I never told anyone the full story. Life moved on, as it always does. But that last day of high school left a mark on me I couldn't explain. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I think I hear the whispers again. It was strange how the school auditorium always seemed like an entirely different building. During assemblies, it felt like a cramped and noisy space, full of restless students waiting for the principal to stop talking. But on the last day of school, with everyone gone, it was eerily silent. The kind of silence that felt like it had weight, pressing down on your chest. I didn't plan to end up there. It just sort of happened. My friends and I had been roaming the school, saying our goodbyes, taking goofy pictures, and promising we'd keep in touch over the summer. After a while, I slipped away. I wanted a moment to myself. The long hallway leading to the auditorium was almost comforting in its emptiness, the walls lined with old posters for musicals and talent shows. When I pushed open the double doors, the smell of stale air hit me immediately. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams of light coming through the high windows. The rows of seats stretched out in front of me, fading into darkness toward the back. The stage was just as I remembered it. Huge, intimidating, with heavy red curtains pulled shut. I don't know what compelled me to walk down the center aisle. Maybe it was the sense of finality, like I was taking a curtain call of my own. My footsteps echoed sharply in the empty space, a constant reminder of how alone I was. Halfway down the aisle, I heard a noise, a faint creak, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. I stopped, listening, but the sound didn't come again. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. It sounded absurdly loud in the vast room. Of course, no one answered. I told myself it was nothing, just the building settling. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I continued down the aisle. When I reached the edge of the stage, I hesitated. There was something about the curtain that unsettled me. It hung perfectly still, as if it were holding its breath. Against my better judgment, I climbed the stairs to the stage. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, and the sound echoed hollowly. I reached out and pulled the curtain aside, half expecting to find someone standing there. There was nothing, just the empty backstage area, cluttered with props and set pieces from last month's spring play. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned to leave. That's when I saw it. One of the seats, about 10 rows from the stage, was occupied. My heart lurched, and for a moment, I thought it must be one of the janitors. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized the figure wasn't moving. They were just sitting there, perfectly still. "Hey," I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. "The school's closed. You're not supposed to be here." No response. The figure didn't so much as twitch. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, squinting to get a better look. It was hard to make out any details in the shadows, but something about their posture was wrong. Their head was tilted at an odd angle, like it was too heavy for their neck. I took a step back, the floorboards creaking loudly. That's when the figure's head snapped upright. My breath caught in my throat as they slowly turned to face me. The light from the windows fell just enough to illuminate their face, or rather, the lack of one. Where there should have been eyes, a nose, and a mouth, there was only smooth, featureless skin. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the stage. The figures stood, their movements unnaturally jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. I couldn't take my eyes off them as they began walking toward me, each step echoing like a hammer blow. I turned and ran, my sneakers slipping on the polished wood of the stage. I reached the side door and yanked it open, the metal handle cold against my palm. Behind me, I could hear the sound of footsteps speeding up. The hallway outside the auditorium was dimly lit, the fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly. I didn't look back as I sprinted down the corridor, my chest burning with each ragged breath. I rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. The figure was there, standing at the end of the hall. It didn't make sense. There was no way they could have gotten there before me. The silence in the hallway was oppressive. Even the buzzing of the lights seemed to fade away as the figure started walking toward me. I backed away, my legs shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I fumbled to pull it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from my mom. "Are you okay? Thought you'd be home by now." I didn't have time to reply. When I looked up, the figure was gone. My heart raced as I stood frozen in the empty hallway, staring at the spot where the figure had been. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the school, but my legs refused to move. Finally, I forced myself to take a shaky step forward. then another. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, almost mocking me. I reached the end of the hall and glanced around the corner, half expecting to see the figure again. It was empty, but that didn't comfort me. If anything, it made me more anxious. I needed to get out. Now, I turned and bolted for the nearest exit. The doors were just ahead, the faint glow of daylight filtering through the glass. Relief surged through me as I pushed the door open and stumbled outside. The cool air hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I just stood there, gulping it down. The parking lot was deserted. My car sat at the far end, and I sprinted toward it without looking back. I could feel the weight of the school behind me, as if it were watching me leave. I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling, and finally managed to unlock the door. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors and started the engine. My breathing was ragged, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was standing at the edge of the lot, watching me. I drove home as fast as I could, every shadow on the road making me flinch. By the time I parked in my driveway, the sun had set and the house was dark. My mom's car was gone. She must have gone out to pick up my sister from practice. The house felt too quiet as I let myself in. I locked the door behind me, double-checking to make sure it was secure. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. I turned on every light I passed, trying to chase away the oppressive darkness. Upstairs in my room, I tried to calm down. I told myself it was over. Whatever that thing was, it couldn't follow me here. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mom. Running late. Be home soon. Don't open the door for anyone. A chill ran down my spine. The message felt strange, off. My mom never worried about me opening the door when she wasn't home. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. That's when I heard it. A faint tapping sound, coming from the window. My room is on the second floor. No one should be able to reach it. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of something on the other side. A hand pressed against the glass. I backed away, my legs trembling so badly I thought they might give out. The tapping stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was worse. I stared at the window, waiting, dreading what might happen next. Then the doorknob rattled. I spun around, my eyes locked on the door. It rattled again, more violently this time, as though someone, or something, was trying to force it open. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to dial 911. The call connected, but all I could hear was static. The doorknob stopped rattling. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from the other side of the door, I heard a voice. It was soft, almost soothing. Let me in. I couldn't move. My entire body felt paralyzed. The voice came again, louder this time. Let me in. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The door creaked, and I realized with horror that it was slowly opening. I hadn't locked it. As the door swung open, I braced myself for what I would see. But there was nothing there, just the empty hallway, stretching out into darkness. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I glanced down at the screen. A new text had appeared. It wasn't from my mom. It wasn't from anyone I recognized. The message read, "You can't hide forever." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the corner of my room, clutching a baseball bat and jumping at every creak and groan of the house. When my mom and sister finally came home, I nearly burst into tears. I never told them what happened. I never told anyone. The next day, I drove past the school, and for a moment, I thought I saw the figure standing at one of the windows, watching me. I don't know what it wanted, and I don't think I ever will. But I haven't gone back to that school since. The last day of school always felt bittersweet, but this year it was more bitter than sweet. I wasn't sentimental about leaving high school. I was ready to be done, but something about the day felt off. Maybe it was the weird, low-pressure weather that hung heavy over the town, or maybe it was the way everyone seemed just a little too eager to leave. By 3 p.m., the halls were nearly empty. Seniors had gathered in the parking lot for impromptu goodbyes, but I hung back. I wanted to make one last round through the school on my own terms. My plan was simple: walk the halls, snap a few pictures for nostalgia, and stop by my locker to grab the last of my stuff. The air inside the building felt cooler than usual. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. As I walked, I noticed small details I'd overlooked for 4 years, like the way the paint near the ceiling was chipped, or how the bulletin board still had faded flyers from dances 2 years ago. When I reached my locker, I found it open. That was odd. I could have sworn I'd locked it earlier. Maybe I was just scatterbrained after finals week. I opened it wider to grab the last of my notebooks, but something else caught my eye. There was a folded piece of paper sitting on the top shelf. It wasn't mine. Curious, I picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat but slanted, and it wasn't familiar. The note read, "Come to locker 371. My heart skipped a beat. Locker 371 was on the lower floor, in the old wing of the school. That area hadn't been used in years, not since a pipe burst sophomore year and flooded half the wing. The lockers were supposed to be sealed shut, and no one went down there anymore. I told myself it was probably a joke. Some bored underclassmen must have thought it would be funny to mess with the seniors one last time. Still, I couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. I slipped the note into my pocket and headed toward the old wing. The hallway leading there was darker than the rest of the school. Most of the lights were out, and the air smelled faintly of mildew. My footsteps echoed loudly, the sound bouncing off the cinder block walls. When I reached the locker bay, I hesitated. The row of lockers loomed ahead, silent and ominous. Locker 371 was in the middle of the row, its metal door rusted and dented. To my surprise, it wasn't sealed shut like the others. The padlock dangled loosely from the latch, as though someone had recently opened it. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling slightly. The door creaked as I pulled it open, revealing a dark, empty interior. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then, at the very back of the locker, I noticed a small, folded piece of paper. My stomach churned as I picked it up. The note was identical to the first one, but this time, it read, "Room 208. I glanced over my shoulder, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was. The building felt colder, the silence heavier. Room 208 was on the second floor, right above me. I debated whether to go, but something about the situation gripped me. I had to know what this was about. The stairwell leading up was dimly lit, the bulbs flickering faintly. The sound of my footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, as though the school itself were amplifying them. When I reached the second floor, I turned toward room 208. The door was closed. Through the narrow window, I could see that the lights inside were off. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My rational mind screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was empty. Desks were scattered haphazardly, and the faint smell of chalk lingered in the air. The only light came from the window, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. Something on the teacher's desk caught my eye, a third note. This one was taped to the surface, its edges curling slightly. My hands shook as I peeled it off. The message was short, but it made my blood run cold. "Stop looking." A loud bang echoed behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The door had slammed shut. I ran to it, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My breathing quickened as I pounded on the door, calling for help, but my voice seemed to die in the empty hall. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and coming from inside the room. The footsteps were deliberate, each one sending a jolt of terror through me. They came from the far corner of the room, near the windows. But when I turned, There was nothing there. Just empty desks and shadows that seemed to stretch too far, twisting unnaturally in the dim light. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. The words echoed in the room, followed by silence so thick it was suffocating. The footsteps stopped. Then came a sound that made my blood turn to ice, a soft, wheezing laugh. It was low and raspy, like someone struggling to breathe, and it came from everywhere at once. I stumbled backward, my legs hitting a desk and nearly sending me sprawling. "Stop!" I shouted, though I didn't know what I was pleading with. My hands fumbled for my phone, but when I pulled it out, the screen was black, dead. I could feel panic rising like bile in my throat. The laughter grew louder, filling the room until it felt like the walls themselves were mocking me. Then it stopped abruptly, plunging the room into silence once more. I heard a whisper, faint, almost unintelligible, but close, too close. "You shouldn't be here." Something moved in the corner of my eye, a shadow that didn't belong. I whipped around, but again, nothing was there. My eyes darted to the teacher's desk, where the last note had been. The desk was empty now. The note was gone. I backed toward the door, yanking at the handle again with all my strength. It didn't budge. My heart pounded as I scanned the room for anything, anyone, but all I saw were those impossibly long shadows creeping closer, pooling at the edges of the desks like liquid darkness. Then the temperature dropped. It wasn't just cold. It was bone deep, the kind of chill that makes your teeth chatter uncontrollably. My breath fogged in front of me as I turned, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood at the front of the classroom, where the blackboard used to be. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its body shrouded in darkness that seemed to writhe like smoke. Its face, or what should have been its face, was featureless, smooth as polished stone, but it was looking at me. I felt it in every fiber of my being. My legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear as the figure began to advance. Its movements were slow, deliberate, almost calculated, and its footsteps echoed with a hollow, metallic sound. The whisper came again, louder this time, as though it were coming from within my own skull. "You were warned." Finally, my legs obeyed me. I bolted to the nearest window, fumbling with the latch. The glass was old, stuck tight, and wouldn't budge. Behind me, the footsteps quickened, each one louder and closer than the last. I grabbed a chair and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, and a rush of cold air poured into the room. Without thinking, I climbed onto the sill, cutting my hands on the jagged edges of the broken window. The figure was only feet away now, its dark form filling my vision. I didn't hesitate. I jumped. The fall wasn't far, just one story, but I landed awkwardly, pain shooting up my leg as I hit the ground. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the sting of fresh cuts, and ran. I didn't look back, not once, as I sprinted across the school grounds to the parking lot. When I reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with blood. I climbed inside, locking the doors and starting the engine. As I peeled out of the lot, my eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The school loomed behind me, dark and silent. But in the window of room 208, I saw the figure. It didn't move, didn't follow. It just stood there, watching. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that day. I threw away the notes, deleted the pictures I'd taken of the school, and tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, I hear things, a soft wheezing laugh, or the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. And every time I do, I think about the note that started it all. Stop looking. The last day of high school wasn't supposed to be anything special for me. I wasn't the sentimental type, and I didn't have a tight-knit friend group to cling to. I planned to grab my things and leave quietly, like I'd done every other day for the past 4 years. But something pulled me toward the gym that afternoon. Maybe it was nostalgia I didn't know I had, or maybe I just wanted a quiet place to think. The gym had been my refuge during lunch breaks when I didn't feel like sitting with anyone. Most days, it was empty except for the faint echoes of past games. I walked in, half expecting the janitors to yell at me for wandering where I wasn't supposed to be, but the place was dead silent. The bleachers were pushed back against the walls, and the basketball hoops hung like unused ornaments. The late afternoon light streamed through the high windows, casting long, diagonal shadows across the polished floor. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. Then I noticed something strange. My footsteps, soft as they were, seemed to echo louder than they should have. I tested it, stomping once on the floor. The sound bounced back, but it wasn't quite right. It was delayed, like the gym was hesitating before returning the sound. Shaking it off, I wandered toward the center of the court. The faint smell of wood polish and sweat hung in the air. My eyes drifted to the banners hanging high on the walls, commemorating victories from long before I was born. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the far side of the gym. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had started. I scanned the room, my heart pounding, but there was no one there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I walked toward the sound, the squeak of my sneakers on the floor seeming unnaturally loud. The far corner of the gym was darker, where the windows didn't reach. As I approached, the whisper came again, clearer this time. It wasn't words. It was more like the faint hiss of someone exhaling. I turned the corner and saw a door I'd never noticed before. It was partially open, revealing a dark stairwell leading down. My stomach tightened. The basement. I'd always heard rumors about the gym's basement, how it was abandoned and off-limits. The most popular story was that it was used as storage for old sports equipment, but some of the seniors swore it had been closed for years because of a fire. I never paid much attention to the stories, but now, standing in front of the door, I felt a strange pull to go down. The whispers were louder now, almost like they were coming from the stairwell itself. I hesitated, glancing back toward the main gym. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed like a lifeline. But something about the whispers, it felt personal, like they were calling to me. I stepped through the door. The stairs creaked under my weight, the sound muffled by the heavy air. The deeper I went, the darker it got. My phone flashlight barely cut through the gloom, illuminating cobwebs and peeling paint. The smell of damp concrete and something metallic filled my nostrils. At the bottom of the stairs, the whispers stopped. I shone my flashlight around, revealing a long, narrow hallway lined with doors. Most of them were closed, their rusted locks corroded with time. At the end of the hallway, one door was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the darkness. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but my feet carried me forward. The air grew colder as I approached the door, and I realized I was holding my breath. When I pushed the door open, the light inside flickered like a dying bulb. The room was small, filled with dusty equipment, deflated basketballs, broken benches, and old trophies coated in grime. In the center of the room was a single chair, facing away from me. I stopped in the doorway, unable to move. The chair creaked softly, as though someone had just shifted their weight in it. "Hello?" I whispered. The chair turned slowly, scraping against the floor. It was empty. The whispers returned, louder than before. They filled the room, coming from every direction at once, a chaotic chorus that made my head pound. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. That's when I saw it, a shadow, darker than the rest, moving along the far wall. I dropped the flashlight in my panic, plunging the room into darkness. The flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam rolling wildly across the room before winking out completely. I was plunged into darkness so absolute it felt suffocating. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, blending into an almost deafening hum that seemed to come from inside my head. I backed into the hallway, groping for the wall to steady myself. My hands brushed against something cold and damp. The air smelled stronger now, metallic and sickly sweet, like rust and decay. I didn't want to think about what might have been on that wall. Then, a sound, a single, deliberate footstep on the concrete floor. It wasn't mine. "Who's there?" I croaked, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my chest. The whispering stopped. Dead silence fell, more unnerving than the noise had been. My breathing was loud and ragged, the only sound in the oppressive stillness. I strained to hear anything at all, but the quiet was suffocating. Then, a voice. "You shouldn't have come here." It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was clear, sharp, and far too close. I spun around, trying to pinpoint the source, but the darkness was impenetrable. My phone was still on the ground, somewhere in the room behind me, but there was no way I was going back in there. I took a step back, and then another, my hand trailing along the wall for guidance. The concrete was rough and cold, and my fingers kept snagging on jagged edges. The open door to the stairwell was somewhere behind me. I just had to get to it. A soft creak echoed from the room I'd left, followed by the sound of something dragging along the floor. My legs moved faster now, almost tripping over themselves as I scrambled back the way I'd come. The hallway stretched on endlessly, the faint light from the stairwell taunting me in the distance. The dragging sound grew louder, more urgent. I didn't dare look back. Finally, my hand brushed against the edge of the doorframe. Relief surged through me as I stumbled into the stairwell, slamming the door shut behind me. The sound echoed through the empty gym above, and I leaned against the door, gasping for air. It wasn't over. The whispers started again, muffled but insistent, coming from the other side of the door. The handle rattled. I pressed my weight against it, praying it would hold. "Go away," I whispered, as if that would do any good. The handle stopped moving, but the whispers didn't fade. They grew louder, seeping through the cracks around the door, surrounding me. I covered my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, but the sound was inside me now, vibrating in my skull. Then, suddenly, silence. I opened my eyes cautiously. The door was still shut, the stairwell dim and empty. I turned toward the stairs, desperate to get out, but froze. At the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the faint light from the gym, was a figure. It stood motionless, blocking my exit. My breath caught in my throat as I stared, unable to move. The figure was tall and thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its arms hung limply at its sides, fingers twitching. I took a step back, and the figure mirrored me, stepping down one stair. The motion was wrong, jerky, like a puppet on strings. My mouth went dry as I realized it was coming toward me, step by step. I turned and ran back down the stairs, my legs screaming in protest. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't let it catch me. The hallway at the bottom seemed even darker now, but I had no choice. I plunged into the blackness, my hands outstretched to feel my way. Behind me, the sound of footsteps quickened, echoing like thunder in the confined space. I turned down another corridor, the walls pressing in on me. My chest burned, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. A light, faint but unmistakable, coming from a crack beneath a door ahead. I sprinted toward it, throwing my shoulder into the door and bursting through. I was back in the gym. The sunlight through the high windows felt like a miracle, but I didn't stop to question how I'd ended up here. I ran for the main doors, my sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. As I pushed them open and stumbled outside, the cool air hit me like a splash of water. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I peeled out of the parking lot without looking back. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the corner of my room, felt like it was watching me. The whispers replayed in my head, taunting me. The next morning, I found a note taped to my bedroom window. The handwriting was jagged and uneven, as if written in haste. It said only 3 words: "You can't escape." The last day of school was supposed to be easy. No more tests, no more assignments, just goodbyes and an endless summer ahead. But something about this year felt different. The hallways were quieter than usual, the excitement subdued, as though everyone was holding their breath. My last class of the day was in the oldest part of the school, where the walls were lined with creaking lockers and the floorboards groaned underfoot. The classrooms here always had a strange vibe. Something about the dim lighting and the lingering smell of mildew made them feel stuck in time. The final bell rang at exactly 2:45 p.m., echoing through the halls with a hollow, metallic clang. The sound lingered longer than it should have, almost as if it didn't want to fade. Most of the students rushed out, their chatter bouncing off the walls as they headed for the parking lot. I stayed behind, taking my time as I cleaned out my desk. It felt surreal to think I'd never sit there again. When I finally left the classroom, the hallway was nearly empty. A few teachers hovered near their doors, chatting quietly, but the place already felt abandoned. I passed by my locker one last time, grabbing a stray notebook and a few pens. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my friend Jake. "Dude, you leaving?" I typed back, "Yeah, in a sec. Meet at the front?" The screen lit up with his reply, "Hurry, this place is creeping me out." I shoved my phone into my pocket and started walking toward the front of the school. The farther I went, the quieter it became. The muffled voices of the teachers disappeared entirely, leaving only the sound of my footsteps. That's when I noticed something strange. The bell rang again. I froze, glancing around. It wasn't the short chime that signaled the end of a period. It was long, drawn out, and much louder than it should have been. The sound vibrated through the walls, rattling the old windows. But when it stopped, the school fell into absolute silence. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the empty hall. No answer. I quickened my pace, my sneakers squeaking against the floor. The air felt heavier now, colder. My eyes darted to the lockers as I passed, half expecting to see something, or someone, peeking out, but the hallway remained empty. When I reached the main entrance, I pushed on the doors, but they didn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but they were locked. That didn't make sense. The doors were always open during school hours, even on the last day. My phone buzzed again, and I yanked it out of my pocket. It was Jake. "Where are you?" "I'm out front," I replied. "Doors are locked." "Wait, I'll try another exit." I turned and started toward the gym, where there was another set of doors that led to the parking lot. But as I walked, I noticed something else strange. The light in the hallway seemed to dim, growing weaker with every step I took. By the time I reached the gym doors, the fluorescent lights were flickering, casting eerie shadows along the walls. I pushed on the gym doors, and they creaked open reluctantly. The gym was dark, the only light coming from the high windows, where the sun was beginning to set. The air inside was colder than the rest of the school, and my footsteps echoed loudly on the polished floor. The double doors leading outside were at the far end of the gym. I made a beeline for them, but halfway across the court, I stopped. Something moved in the shadows near the bleachers. "Jake," I called, hoping against hope that he'd somehow come inside. No response. The movement came again, quicker this time, like someone, or something, darting between the rows of seats. My heart pounded as I backed away, keeping my eyes fixed on the bleachers. The sound of faint whispering reached my ears, too soft to make out words, but loud enough to send a chill down my spine. Suddenly, the gym lights flickered on, flooding the space with harsh fluorescent light. The bleachers were empty. The whispering stopped, but now I could see something else, a single figure standing at the far end of the gym, near the doors. It wasn't Jake. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in what looked like a tattered uniform. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its gaze locked on me, cold and unblinking. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, like it was waiting. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, and I pulled it out, desperate for some kind of connection to the outside world. The screen showed a single message from Jake: "Turn around." I froze, the phone slipping from my hands and clattering onto the gym floor. My blood turned to ice as Jake's message echoed in my mind. "Turn around?" Slowly, I turned my head, my entire body trembling. Behind me, near the center of the gym, another figure stood. It hadn't been there before. This one was shorter than the first, its outline blurry, as though the edges of its body were dissolving into the air. It didn't move, but the same oppressive feeling of being watched made my skin crawl. The gym lights flickered violently, plunging the room into a strobe-like nightmare. Each flash revealed more figures, appearing one by one around the edges of the court. They stood silently, their faces blank or obscured, their forms flickering with the lights. The whispering started again, louder this time. A disjointed chorus of voices that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. I backed toward the nearest exit, my breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. My foot brushed against my phone, and I bent down to grab it, my eyes never leaving the figures. They hadn't moved, but I could feel them watching me, waiting. The whispering grew louder, the words still unintelligible, but laced with an urgency that made my ears ring. I reached the double doors and pushed, praying they would open. They didn't budge. I slammed my shoulder against them, but it was like trying to move a brick wall. A loud, metallic screech echoed through the gym, and I whipped around to see the bleachers sliding out on their own. The figures moved now, stepping forward in unison, their jerky, unnatural movements sending a wave of nausea through me. The whispering changed, coalescing into a single word that repeated over and over. "Stay." "No," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I don't want to stay." I turned and ran along the edge of the gym, heading for another set of doors near the equipment room. My legs felt like lead, every step a struggle as the temperature plummeted. Frost began to form on the gym floor, the moisture in the air freezing into a fine mist. The doors to the equipment room were slightly ajar, and I slipped through, slamming them shut behind me. The room was cramped, filled with shelves of old basketballs, volleyball nets, and other forgotten gear. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The whispering didn't stop. It seeped through the cracks around the door, growing louder and more frantic. Then, the handle began to turn. I scrambled backward, nearly tripping over a pile of mats. My hands fumbled for something, anything, I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a metal pole, and I gripped it tightly, raising it in front of me. The door creaked open, and the whispering ceased. The silence was deafening. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a figure stepped into the room. It was the tall one from before, its form stretching unnaturally to fit the low ceiling. Its face was still obscured, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice shaking. It tilted its head, as if considering my question. Then, in a voice that sounded like 100 overlapping whispers, it said, "The bell never stops." The words sent a shiver down my spine, and before I could respond, it lunged. I swung the pole instinctively, the metal connecting with a hollow thud. The figure dissolved into smoke, but the whispering returned, louder than ever. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the shelves rattling violently as the lights flickered. I ran. Bursting back into the gym, I was met with chaos. The figures were everywhere now, their forms swirling and shifting as they moved closer. The air was thick with the sound of the bell, ringing endlessly in my ears. The main doors stood open. I didn't question it. I sprinted toward them, the icy air stinging my lungs. The figures reached for me, their hands stretching unnaturally long, but I didn't stop. I barreled through the doors and into the parking lot, the sunlight blinding after the dim gym. Jake's car was idling nearby, and he leaned out the window, his face pale. "What the hell happened to you?" he shouted. "Drive!" I screamed, throwing myself into the passenger seat. Jake didn't hesitate. He peeled out of the lot, the tires screeching as we sped away from the school. I looked back once, and my heart sank. The figures stood in the doorway, watching as we disappeared down the road. I never went back to that school. Over the summer, I tried to make sense of what had happened, but no one believed me, not even Jake, who swore the doors had never been locked when he went out front. The whispering still haunts me. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint sound of the bell in the distance, ringing endlessly.